Welcome to the Death Row and Executions channel. I am Paco Rivera. You can also follow me on Facebook for more updates and Death Row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Last month, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed another death warrant for the execution of Michael Duane Zack, with the execution scheduled to take place on October the 3rd. Michael Zack was born on December 14, 1968. Zack's father had said that he married Zack's mother when she became pregnant. Zack's mother, Mary Helen Cardwell, already had a 3-year-old daughter at this time from a previous relationship. That girl would be Michael Zack's half-sister. Personally, I have never liked that half word. They have the same mother that made them brother and sister. Period. And that is how I will refer to her, as Michael Zack's sister. But Zack's father had also said that he divorced Mary Helen soon after the marriage because of her heavy drinking and frequent intoxication. Zack's mother, Mary Helen, later married Army Sergeant Anthony Midkiff. By March of the year 1981, Sergeant Midkiff, Mary Helen, and her now 16-year-old daughter were living on the Fort Polk Army Base, located in Fort Polk, South Louisiana, where Sergeant Midkiff was stationed. Michael Zack, who was now 12 years old, had been staying with family or foster care, depending on which report one reads, in New Orleans, Louisiana, about 220 miles away from the Fort Polk Army Base. Mary Helen's 16-year-old daughter had a boyfriend that the mother did not approve of, and when the young girl told her mother that she wanted to go to the prom with that boy, the mother told her that she cannot. On March 9th, 1981, while 35-year-old Mary Helen Midkiff was asleep in bed, her teenage daughter grabbed a hold of an axe, approached her mother in bed. She turned into Lizzie Borden and proceeded to deliver at least 25 blows with the axe to her mother's body, killing her. According to reports, Mary Helen had been decapitated and her hands were detached from the body. The girl then went outside and tossed the axe onto the roof of the house, which is where it was later found by investigators. She then cleaned up as much of the blood as she could and, get this, she then called a taxi, saying that she needed a cab to take her mother to the hospital. Army base officials initially investigated the crime, but when they learned that a soldier was not involved, that the case was committed by a civilian upon another civilian, it was turned over to federal authorities. The teenage girl was detained at a mental hospital in Shreveport, Louisiana, where she was to be evaluated. There would be no trial. The girl was declared insane and was held for treatment, and she was released 4 years later. Michael Zack would later say that he had witnessed his sister kill his mother, and that is what left him traumatized and prone to later committing violent acts, including the murder of the 2 women that he was arrested for. But when Zack's maternal grandmother, Mabel Cardwell, was interviewed soon after Michael Zack's arrest in 1996, she had said that was not true. She had recalled vividly the events of 15 years earlier when her daughter was killed by her granddaughter, and that Michael Zack, who was 12 years old at the time, was living in New Orleans, over 200 miles away from the army base. Michael Zack would later change that story and say that his sister did not kill his mother, that it was his stepfather, Sergeant Midkiff, who had killed her, something that was also totally debunked by investigators. As an adult, Michael Zack would later settle in the city of Tallahassee in Florida's Panhandle, where he lived with a girlfriend. He would also frequent a local bar owned by a woman named Edith Pope. Edith would sometimes give Zack some odd jobs to do around the bar so that he can earn some money. One day, Zack was at the bar and he received a phone call from his girlfriend. Well, by that moment, we can say ex-girlfriend, because she told him on the phone to get all his stuff out of her apartment, that he was being evicted. The bar owner, Edith Pope, lent Michael Zack her car, a red Honda, so that he can go pick up his stuff and move them to another location. Now, I don't know if Zack ever went to get his stuff, but what we do know is that he drove that red Honda across the Florida Panhandle from Tallahassee to Panama City, about 100 miles away. He never returned the Honda that he had borrowed. While in Panama City, Zack met a man named Bobby Chandler at a local bar. Chandler owned a construction company and hired Zack to do some work for him. And when Chandler realized that Zack was living in the car that he was driving, the red Honda, sleeping in the car, he invited Zack to stay in his home until Zack gets himself settled somewhere. Several days later, in the middle of the night, Zack left the house, stealing a rifle, a handgun, and $42 from Bobby Chandler's wallet. Zack then drove to Niceville, Florida. And on the morning of June 12, 1996, he pawned the guns there for $225. Zack then drove from Niceville to Okaloosa County, and while at a local bar late one evening, he struck up a friendship with a 40-year-old woman named Laurie Russillo. Michael Zack was 27 years old. According to some reports, Laurie agreed to get in the red Honda with Zack and head over to the beach to do drugs. Once parked at the beach, Zack brutally beat Laurie while still inside the red Honda. She got out of the car and he continued to beat her and then strangled her to death. Zack then dragged her body behind a sand dune and covered her face with dirt and sand before leaving. All of her clothing had been ripped off her body, so it appears a sexual assault had taken place. Investigators, however, were unable to recover his DNA on the body. From Okaloosa County, Michael Zack traveled about 50 miles in the red Honda to a beach near Pensacola, Florida. He entered Dirty Joe's bar during the afternoon and struck up a friendship with the bartender, a 31-year-old woman named Ravonne Smith Kennedy. The bar was almost empty of customers, so the bartender, Ravonne, spent much of her time that afternoon shooting pool or tossing darts with Zack. At some point, Zack invited Ravonne to go to the beach with him so that they can smoke some marijuana. Ravonne then called a male friend named Russell Williams and asked him to come over to the bar. It's not clear in the reports, but it seems Ravonne wanted Russell there to avoid going alone later in the evening to the beach with a man that she had just met. At about 7 o'clock that night, the three of them, Zack, Ravonne, and Russell, went to the beach and smoked marijuana that Zack had supplied. And all three of them returned to the bar a short time later. Ravonne's friend, Russell, then left the bar at about 8 o'clock that night. Zack and Ravonne also left the bar and went to her home, a home that she shared with her live-in boyfriend, a man named Danny Schaefer. Only the boyfriend wasn't home. Once inside the apartment, Michael Zack smashed a beer bottle on Ravonne's head. Shards of glass and blood splattered all over the living room. Ravonne tried to escape by running into the master bedroom, but Zack caught up to her. He then sexually assaulted her as she lay bleeding in the bed. After the assault, Ravonne tried again to escape by running into another room, but Zack caught up to her again and beat her brutally. He then got a knife from the kitchen and stabbed her 4 times in the chest, killing her. Zack then took a television, a VCR, Ravonne's purse, and her car keys, and placed all the stolen items in Ravonne's car. He traveled in the dead woman's car back to Panama City and tried to pawn the TV and the VCR. But the pawn shop owner said he needed to make a phone call to verify that the items were not stolen. Michael Zack panicked and fled from the store, abandoning the items. He later abandoned Ravonne's car behind a restaurant and broke into a house that nobody was living in and remained in there for several days. The red Honda belonging to the bar owner from Tallahassee was recovered in Pensacola. When police learned that there was a man living in the empty house, they entered and arrested Michael Zack, who would then give a full confession of the 2 women that he had murdered. The case went to trial in 1997, and Michael Zack's defense tried to present a case claiming that Zack suffers from a severe intellectual disability condition and that he had sustained a horrible and abusive upbringing while growing up and should therefore not be eligible for the death penalty. And guess who showed up at the trial in support of Michael Zack? Remember his Lizzie Borden sister? Zack's sister would also testify at the trial. She had stated that their stepfather, Army Sergeant Midkiff, had raped her and that Midkiff had tortured Michael Zack while he was growing up by burning his genitals with a hot spoon whenever he wet the bed. Of course, no one in their right mind believed any of the sisters' stories, as she had surely made them up in an attempt for the court to be lenient on Michael Zack. Michael Zack was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Laurie Russillo, and he received a sentence of death for Ravonne Smith Kennedy's murder. By the way, for anyone out there not familiar at all with the Lizzie Borden story, if that's even possible, I fully recommend you read about it or watch one of the many documentaries about that case. It's a fascinating story. Please remember to subscribe for more death row and upcoming execution stories. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. I'm Paco Rivera. Bye.